When the sun rose over the mountains and illuminated the vast green field, Abel woke up with a gentle feeling in his chest. He took a deep breath, smelling the fresh morning air and listening to the bleating of the sheep he loved so much. Abel was the son of Adam and Eve, two human beings who carried the memory of a time when everything was pure and perfect. But now, the world was different. The earth no longer offered everything generously. Work, care, and hope were needed. Abel, even though he was young, had a sensitive heart. He knew that life required dedication, but something inside him drove him to do everything with commitment and joy. From the early hours of the day until dusk, Abel walked among the sheep. He knew each one by name, felt the warmth of the sun on his skin, and heard the call of the wind, as if nature were somehow speaking to him. He gathered soft wool, fetched fresh water, and protected the lambs from danger. Abel was careful and kind because he believed that what we do with love becomes a kind of conversation with God. At that time, he and his brother Cain were different, each following his own path. Cain cultivated the land, planted seeds, harvested fruits and roots, and was also dedicated. But the bond between them was sometimes tense, as the differences between the brothers could be felt even in the little things of everyday life. One morning full of expectations, Abel woke up determined to take an offering to God. He chose the best lambs, the healthiest ones, with shiny coats and bright eyes. No scraps or leftovers. What he loved most would be given in thanksgiving. It was recognition that everything he had came from above, from the Creator. Abel walked to the stone altar with steady hands but a calm heart, knowing that he was doing this not out of obligation but out of gratitude. His brother, Cain, with determined steps, also brought his offering, crops from the field, fruits, roots, and leaves. However, something was different. Perhaps it was a feeling of comparison, perhaps a desire to be noticed. When the time came to offer their gifts, the sky seemed quieter. Abel placed the lambs on the altar, looked up, and felt his heart fill with sudden joy, almost as if he were receiving an invisible hug. God accepted Abel's offering, but did not receive Cain's in the same way. This cast a shadow over Cain's eyes. Abel said nothing, neither judging nor celebrating. He just stood there, feeling the silence and the weight of that moment between brothers. The joyful atmosphere gave way to discomfort, a tension that spread through the air. Cain looked at Abel differently, as if he saw him as a rival, not a brother. Words stuck in both their throats. The field, which used to be a place of peace, gradually filled with strange feelings. The bleating of the sheep seemed more distant. Abel did not fully understand what was happening, but he knew that something had changed. His heart, though hurt, did not cease to trust in God, for he believed that living a life of true devotion was more important than any recognition. And it was in that silence, in that space of uncertainty, that the story of the two brothers took a turn that would mark all of humanity forever. The hours following that offering were marked by heavy silences and lost gazes. Cain walked away from the field, taking with him a whirlwind of feelings that Abel could not reach. Among the sheep, Abel tried to occupy his mind with daily tasks, but he could not help feeling the weight of his brother's wounded pride. He remembered Cain's gaze, filled with pain and anger, and wondered why the joy of one had to be a cause of sadness for the other. The wind seemed colder, and even the sheep sensed that something bad was coming. One afternoon, Cain called Abel to go to the fields. There was no kindness in his voice, only a strange urgency. Abel, without hesitation, followed his brother, for he still believed in the strength of blood and brotherly love. They walked in silence, their feet sinking into the soft earth, the horizon tinged golden by the setting sun. The air was thick with tension. Cain finally spoke, but his words sounded bitter, full of accusations and doubts. He questioned Abel, trying to understand why God had accepted his offering and rejected his. Abel humbly said that he had given his best, with an open heart, expecting nothing in return, only wanting to please God. He did not speak with pride, but with the sincerity of one who had no definitive answer. Cain, unable to hear his brother's words, felt even more out of place. For him, God's approval seemed unattainable, as distant as the stars in the sky, and at that moment, envy turned into an irresistible shadow. Overcome by a fierce impulse, Cain lunged at Abel. The field, which had so often been the scene of childhood games and work together, now witnessed a tragedy. Abel did not react, did not fight back. His eyes sought his brother until the last moment, not with hatred, but with compassion and deep sadness. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy as a rock. The sound of distant sheep was now a lament, and the sky seemed to weep along with them. Abel's spirit found peace with God, for he lived and died with a pure heart, faithful to the end. Cain, on the other hand, was left alone, feeling the unbearable weight of the choice he had made. Abel's story did not end with his death, for his life taught that God looks at the heart, at the true intention behind actions. The echo of this lesson spans generations and invites each person to reflect on the true meaning of pleasing God, not by appearances, but by sincere surrender, humility, and love. And as time went on, the field kept Abel's memory alive, and the story of the brothers left a question hanging in the air. Which path will we choose when envy and pride knock on the door of our hearts? As the echo of the tragic event hung over the field, the wind whispered through the leaves and every stone seemed to hold the memory of the pain. Cain, now alone in that vast space, was overcome by a strange feeling that mixed remorse and fear. He walked in circles, avoiding looking at the place where his brother lay. The silence around him grew heavier and heavier, and the voice of his conscience grew like thunder in the distance. For the first time, Cain understood the meaning of absolute emptiness, for his soul was scarred, and there was no one else there to hear him or welcome his outburst. At that moment, God approached Cain and asked him about Abel. Cain's heart raced, for he knew what he had done, but he tried to hide his guilt by saying that he was not responsible for his brother. God, knowing all things, revealed that Abel's blood cried out from the ground. It was not possible to escape the consequences of one's own heart. There, Cain realized that a new burden would fall upon him, for his life would become a long journey marked by repentance and distance. In the empty field, Abel had physically disappeared, but the marks of his faith remained imprinted like firm footprints on the ground. The purity in his gaze, his silent surrender, his humility before God. Meanwhile, in heaven, Abel found rest with the Creator. Enveloped in a peace he had never experienced on earth, he understood that his story did not end in the silent field. He felt that his journey, though brief, had much greater repercussions. His choice to offer the best of himself, without ulterior motives, was like a seed sown in fertile soil. Abel's example would serve to show, throughout the ages, that God is not impressed by grand appearances or empty rituals, but by the sincerity of the heart. True value is not in what one possesses, but in the willingness to give everything to the Father, even in the face of the unknown and the incomprehension of others. Others, upon hearing Abel's story, would be moved to rethink their own attitudes, letting fall the masks of pride and strife. Abel's serene face in the face of adversity would become a symbol of complete trust in God. In the most difficult moments, remembering what happened in that silent field, restless hearts would learn to seek, above all, true communion and unreserved faith. Abel's life, even though cut short so early, became a beacon for all those who desire to draw closer to God with truth and humility. Abel's silent legacy echoes, calling each one to choose between the envy that destroys and the faith that restores. Abel's absence spread like a dark veil over the family. Adam and Eve quickly realized that something irreparable had happened. Lost looks and agonizing silence revealed the abyss that had formed between parents and children. Eve's heart broke when she could no longer see Abel's gentle smile or hear his calm voice among the sheep. Adam tried to be strong, but the unbridled pain was visible on his face, as if the very soil from which he drew his sustenance had become barren. The suffering of that loss brought to the surface old wounds, memories of Eden and of the time when God's presence was constant among them. They wondered where they had failed, trying to find meaning in such a tragedy. Cain, restless and increasingly bitter, felt the weight of isolation in his chest. He wandered far from home, avoiding his parents' gaze. Every face was a mirror of the guilt that haunted him night and day. In Cain's heart, the days turned into a sequence of shadows, and his dreams were populated by Abel's compassionate gaze, always silent, always ready to forgive. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, as if the earth, witness to the blood that had been spilled, cried out with every step he took. The ground was now hostile beneath his feet. The plants seemed to struggle to grow, and even the air around him had become thick and difficult to breathe. Time passed, and even though they suffered, Adam and Eve sought comfort in conversations with God, trying to understand the meaning of existence amid the pain. In this process of mourning, something surprising happened. The memory of Abel's example began to gain even more strength among them. Eve spent nights remembering her son's humble words, his sincere prayers, and his unassuming devotion. Adam, as he tended the seeds in the land, remembered how Abel treated every creature with respect and tenderness. Abel's gaze, full of faith, became a living, almost palpable memory, inspiring his parents to seek a closer relationship with God. In heaven, surrounded by light and peace, Abel contemplated the pain of his family. He realized that his sacrifice had not been in vain, for a new desire to surrender to God's will was blossoming within those he loved. There, even though he was no longer on earth, Abel matured in spirit, understanding that his gestures of humility and faith, though simple, had the power to transform hearts and generate hope in the darkest night. A new obstacle arose for those who continued, but also a new strength, the certainty that even in the deepest valleys, genuine faith illuminates the way. One early morning, when the dew still rested on the grass and the moon cast its soft light over the valley, he felt an inner call to walk to the field where everything had happened. The wind seemed to whisper ancient promises, and despite her pain, she felt the courage to go. Adam woke up and noticed his wife was gone. Filled with concern, he followed her silently, guided by his protective instinct. On the way, they didn't say a word, but their hearts were intertwined with longing. When they arrived, a deep silence surrounded the scene of the tragedy. The image of their son lying there was almost unbearable, but they both felt a different strength. They were overcome by tears, falling together on their knees on the stained ground. Eve whispered a simple prayer, almost a lament, asking God for understanding and relief from their suffering. Adam, once so hardened, allowed himself to weaken before the Eternal One, confessing his fear and loneliness. In that moment of surrender, a gentle breeze enveloped them in an inexplicable way. It was as if God himself was present among them, touching their wounds with invisible hands. A growing peace enveloped them, dispelling the shadows within both their hearts. Little by little, they realized they were not alone. The memory of Abel overflowed with love, life, and hope. The barren fields seemed to be transformed. White wildflowers began to sprout where before there had only been pain, and the birds, until then silent, raised a subtle song in the morning. Eve felt a certainty grow within her. God had accepted her son's sacrifice and offered comfort deeper than any words could express. Adam, touched by his wife's renewed faith and Abel's example, recognized the need for true humility and simple surrender. The tragedy that had devastated their home now blossomed into learning and communion, as if the seed planted by Abel had sprouted hope in the hearts of those who remained. Cain, even from afar, felt this transformation. He agonized over his isolation, but one night, before falling asleep, he heard in a dream the calm voice of his brother calling him to repentance and forgiveness. It was not easy for him, for his pride burned like a fire that could not be extinguished. But in that dream, he experienced for a moment the peace that filled his family and realized that perhaps there was a way to overcome his guilt. At dawn that day, as the morning breeze caressed the crops and the animals awoke in peace, Adam and Eve's family rose again, transformed by pain and restored by hope. Abel, even though absent from the land, remained present in every gesture of faith, courage, and humility, showing that a full life resurfaces when one truly trusts in God. As the days passed, the field once marked by death became a place of renewal in the family's life. Eve found the courage to resume her tasks, still feeling the absence of her son, but now moved by the confidence that God's love had not abandoned the family. As he worked the land and cared for the animals, Adam saw signs of hope in the little things: a tree that bloomed again, lambs that played more joyfully, the sweet scent of new flowers growing where tears had fallen. It was as if the Creator was restoring a breath of life to that wounded soil, a silent message that there is always the possibility of a new beginning. One morning, while Adam was gathering water from the stream, he felt a strong presence beside her, as close as the warmth of the sun on her skin. Her heart calmed down, a deep peace flooded her being, and she fell into prayer, opening herself to God with sincerity. The words flowed like clean water, without rehearsal or fear, surrendering all her pain, longing, and hope. At that moment, she felt an inner touch that urged her to forgive not only Cain, but also herself for the guilt and doubt she carried. This forgiveness set her free, and tears ran down her face, but they were no longer tears of despair, but of surrender and gratitude. Adam later found her serene as he had not seen her in a long time. He understood that something had changed in his wife, and that this serenity born of pain was a gift from God himself. That night, the family gathered around a campfire. Even with Abel's absence and Cain's distance, the atmosphere was one of prayer and closeness. The flame illuminated Eve's face as she led a prayer full of faith, thanking God for not abandoning a contrite heart and for renewing hope. Adam confirmed this, giving thanks for the strength poured out upon them, and asked for blessings not only for himself but also for Cain, wherever he might be. A light breeze blew among them, and for a moment everyone felt the hand of God warming their aching hearts, strengthening their confidence that even in falls, faith can be a source of new life. That night, in the silence of the countryside, each one felt the providential care of the Most High. The certainty of divine love made it possible to start over, even if the marks of loss would never disappear. As the sky filled with stars, Adam and Eve knew in the depths of their being that no suffering was in vain when life was placed in God's hands. Time passed, but Abel's absence still hung over the family like a silent and constant cloud. However, the strength of faith and the signs of hope given by God gave Adam and Eve a new willingness to face the future. They learned to find comfort not only in what was lost, but in what could be reborn each day. One evening, the sky turned into a golden mosaic. Eve enjoyed the cool breeze sitting near the field that, once marked by pain, now bloomed with bright colors. Her eyes lingered on a delicate white flower, born on the ground that had once received the tears of a grieving mother. At that moment, she was overcome by a deep understanding. Neither death, nor longing, nor even the emptiness left by tragedy would be able to close her heart to God's presence or nullify the love that united her children. Every difficult moment, every night of crying, had been an opportunity to turn even more to the Creator. Adam, watching from afar, noticed Eve's serene posture, her caring gestures, and realized how everything had changed. The losses, however profound, had united them, led the family to rebuild ties with the Sovereign, and led their hearts from pride to humility, from rebellion to acceptance. The past, once marked only by guilt and longing, now pulsed with new meaning. It was a story of overcoming, faith, and rebirth. Meanwhile, far away, Cain wandered through the wilderness, surrounded by the silence of his pain. He felt the weight of exile and guilt, but that night, his dreams were different. This time, he not only heard his brother's call, but saw himself before an altar, offering a new sacrifice to God. He felt, more than he heard, that there was hope even for the most wounded and proud heart. His father's words, childhood memories, and Abel's serene gaze all mingled in his weary soul, showing him that the true purpose was not just to survive, but to allow repentance to guide him back to the presence of the Creator. In the sacred clearing where Adam and Eve returned to pray every afternoon, the family, even bearing the marks of the past, felt their hearts vibrate with a certainty: no suffering is in vain when it is watered by faith. Abel's sacrifice was not forgotten, nor was it useless. It was a seed, transforming pain into hope, barren land into a flower garden, lamentation into praise. There, in that silent climax, each character understood the magnitude of their story and finally accepted that God's love can bring new life even from the most wounded soil in the world. As new mornings dawned, Adam and Eve began to experience within themselves a consolidated and mature peace, unlike any they had ever felt before. Each dawn brought back memories of their lost son, but now, enveloped in God's welcoming silence, they were able to approach their longing with tenderness. The simple rituals of daily life, such as preparing food, caring for the animals, and the renewed fields, became silent symbols of the cycle of loss and new beginnings that life presented to them. One day, while harvesting wheat in the soft morning light, Eve understood in her heart that true love does not disappear with death, but is transformed and remains latent in gestures, words, and memories. She realized that suffering combined with faith can shape the soul, making it more compassionate, open to life, and a divine consolation. In Adam's soul, the old weight of guilt softened. Each fruit harvested, each animal born, now seemed like a subtle message from the Creator. It is always possible to restore what has been hurt, as long as the heart does not close itself to God's action. And in moments of prayer, Adam, Eve, and their other children began to mention Abel no longer only as a lament, but as an example of surrender and trust. They smiled again, even with tears in their eyes, because they felt that Abel remained alive in faith, not as an absence, but as a gentle beacon illuminating their steps. Even Cain, in his lonely wanderings, felt touched deep in his soul by the echoes of forgiveness experienced by his parents. One day, as he gazed at the starry sky, he realized that he could finally turn his face back to God, even though he was who he was and had done what he had done. For the first time since his escape, he bowed his head and murmured words of repentance, timid but sincere, feeling the weight of guilt gradually being replaced by a silent hope. It was as if God's compassionate touch reached even the most distant of his children, showing that there is no pain that cannot be healed, no distance that cannot be overcome by divine love. The transformed field blossomed as never before, reflecting the renewal that had taken place in the hearts of the family. United not by the absence of suffering, but by victory over it, Adam, Eve, and their children finally understood that the greatest lesson was that faith, even simple and fragile, like Abel's, allows life to never be defeated. There, amid new harvests and quiet laughter, the story ended with promises of hope, new beginnings, and abundant life. At the dawn of a clear day, Eve woke up feeling an unexpected certainty in her heart, as if an ancient promise were about to be fulfilled. She looked around and heard the soft singing of birds mingling with the gentle whisper of the breeze among the flowers in the field. Adam was already kneeling near the stone altar, wrapped in silent prayer. Eve approached him, and, together, they turned their faces toward the sky, letting their prayers rise without words, only with silence filled with hope and gratitude. At that moment, a soft light, different from the sunlight, covered the field where there had once been sadness. The place took on a translucent, warm glow, like an embrace from the Creator himself. Eve felt the warmth on her skin and closed her eyes, allowing old pains to dissolve in the peace that filled the place. When she reopened her eyes, she noticed something extraordinary. The earth, which still bore traces of past suffering, now exploded into flowers of all colors, spreading a sweet perfume, and small seeds sprouted every moment, filling the spaces once marked by absence. A feeling of fulfillment ran through Adam and Eve's bodies, as if all the love they had ever dreamed of receiving was finally tangible. The sound of children's laughter echoed in the wind, and both immediately thought of Abel, feeling his living and luminous presence among them. It was an undeniable certainty Abel, though absent, was closer than ever, participating in every harvest, every prayer, every moment of reconciliation that unfolded there. That morning, Eve felt life reborn within her, and a simple joy took hold of her gestures. She was carrying a new child, a clear sign that the cycle of pain and hope was repeating itself, but now transformed by the miracle of God's persevering love. Cain, in the distance, was surprised by a peace he had never experienced before. Feeling the breeze on his face, he saw that the earth beneath his feet was also blossoming, and he understood that his parents' forgiveness, his brother's sacrifice, and the Creator's love were capable of restoring everything he thought was irretrievably destroyed. Around the family, life pulsed differently, no longer dominated by the weight of loss, but filled with the certainty that the impossible had become real. Yes, the miracle had happened, and everyone felt, deep in their souls, that God's promise never fails. Time passed, and Adam and Eve's family, once marked by pain, was now recognized for the silent strength of hope. The once blood-stained field had become a source of abundance and joy, showing that God's love can transform the greatest losses into new beginnings. He walked daily among the flowers and fruits, caressing the womb in which a new life was growing. Adam, with steady hands and eyes moist with gratitude, tended the altar and renewed his prayers. The other children learned to harvest not only what sprouted from the earth, but also the lessons that Abel's sacrifice had left in every smile, reconciliation, and gesture of kindness. Cain, now less errant, allowed himself to feel forgiveness transform his very soul. He realized for the first time that his life would not end in guilt, for the Creator always reserves a source of mercy for repentant hearts. The signs of the past were no longer just memories of a scar, but seeds of renewal planted in the soil of time. The reunited family could smile, cry, and remember Abel with tenderness, no longer as an absence, but as a living presence through faith and the fruits harvested with humility. In everyone's heart was engraved the certainty that the greatest offering to God is a sincere heart, willing to learn from pain, to seek forgiveness, and to start over as many times as necessary. There is no tragedy so great that love and faith cannot transform it into a new garden. Abel's story has become a beacon for all. His humility and surrender showed that the true miracle is not only in overcoming suffering, but in allowing peace, reconciliation, and God's presence to reign even after the storm. If you were moved by Abel and his family's journey, leave a like. Tell us what you thought of this journey in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more touching stories like this one.